The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Westview National Bank, casting long rectangles of light across the polished marble floor. At precisely 10 o'clock, Anthony Reynolds pushed through the revolving door, his leather portfolio tucked neatly under his arm. He paused for a moment, taking in the spacious lobby with its high ceilings and potted plants placed at strategic intervals. The bank had recently undergone renovations, and everything from the sleek digital displays to the modern furniture spoke of wealth and stability. Anthony straightened his navy blue suit, jacket, and checked his watch, a gift from his grandfather when he graduated with his architecture degree 12 years ago. He was right on time for his appointment with the bank manager, Mrs. Helen Blackwell. The meeting had been scheduled a week in advance and confirmed just yesterday by Anthony himself. As the lead architect for a community development project that would transform an abandoned lot into a vibrant neighborhood center, securing this loan was crucial. "Good morning," Anthony said as he approached the reception desk, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had presented to boardrooms full of executives. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Mrs. Blackwell, Anthony Reynolds from Reynolds & Associates Architecture." The receptionist, a young woman with blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, glanced at her computer screen and then back at Anthony. Her smile remained fixed, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Let me see if Mrs. Blackwell is ready for you," she said, picking up her phone. After a brief hushed conversation, she returned her attention to Anthony. "I'm afraid Mrs. Blackwell is currently in another meeting. She asks if you wouldn't mind waiting. She shouldn't be too long." Anthony nodded, hiding his slight disappointment. These things happened in business. Schedules shifted, emergencies came up. "No problem at all. I'll wait." "Thank you for understanding," the receptionist replied, gesturing toward a seating area. "Can I offer you some coffee or water while you wait?" "Coffee would be great. Black, please." Anthony settled into one of the leather armchairs, placing his portfolio on the small table beside him. He pulled out his phone to check his emails, responding to a few urgent ones from his team back at the office. The coffee arrived in a white porcelain cup bearing the bank's logo, a thoughtful touch that Anthony appreciated. He took a sip, savoring the rich flavor. At least they didn't skimp on the coffee. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Anthony watched as other clients entered the bank. A middle-aged white couple was greeted warmly and escorted almost immediately into an office. Not Mrs. Blackwell's, but they hardly waited at all. An older white gentleman arrived shortly after, and within 5 minutes, he too disappeared down a hallway with a bank employee. Anthony checked his watch again and returned to reviewing the presentation he had prepared. The community center project was personal to him in many ways. Growing up in that same neighborhood, he had witnessed firsthand how lack of resources affected families and especially children. The center would include educational spaces, a small health clinic, and recreational facilities, a safe haven and opportunity hub rolled into one. He had poured his heart into the design, ensuring it would be both beautiful and functional while staying within budget. At the 45-minute mark, Anthony approached the reception desk again. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if there's any update on my meeting with Mrs. Blackwell. I've been waiting for quite some time." The receptionist's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Reynolds. Mrs. Blackwell is still occupied with an important client. She asked me to assure you she'll be with you as soon as possible. Would you like me to refresh your coffee?" "No, thank you," Anthony replied, his tone remaining professional despite his growing frustration. He returned to his seat, noticing that a young white woman who had arrived just 10 minutes ago was now being led toward Mrs. Blackwell's office. The door opened briefly, and Anthony caught a glimpse of the bank manager, a woman in her 50s with immaculately styled gray hair and a cream-colored suit, before the door closed again. So she was available, just not for him. Anthony took a deep breath, pushing down the familiar feeling that threatened to rise in his chest. He'd been here before. The unspoken dismissal, the subtle message that his time wasn't as valuable, that he wasn't as important as other clients. After 15 years in the architecture business, he'd learned to navigate these situations with patience and dignity, even when it stung. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Olivia. "How's the meeting going?" "Did they love the designs?" Anthony hesitated before responding. "Still waiting to get in. We'll update you soon." He didn't want to worry her or bring negativity into her day. Olivia was already juggling so much: her job as a high school counselor, coordinating their daughter's after-school activities, and volunteering with the neighborhood association. The same neighborhood association that had enthusiastically endorsed his community center proposal. An hour had now passed since his scheduled appointment time. Anthony watched as the young woman emerged from Mrs. Blackwell's office, smiling and shaking the manager's hand. Mrs. Blackwell walked her all the way to the front door, chatting amiably. As she turned to head back to her office, her eyes briefly met Anthony's. There was a flicker of recognition. She clearly knew he was waiting, but she quickly looked away and disappeared down the hallway without acknowledgement. Anthony's phone buzzed again. This time it was James, his business partner, asking about another project deadline. Anthony welcomed the distraction, diving into a detailed response about material selections and contractor schedules. Architecture had been his passion since he was a boy, sketching buildings on any scrap of paper he could find. His grandfather, who had worked in construction his entire life but never had the opportunity to design buildings himself, had recognized Anthony's talent early and encouraged it fiercely. "You'll build things people haven't even dreamed of yet," his grandfather used to say. Those words had carried Anthony through challenging times, through the architecture program where he was one of only 3 black students, through the early years of struggling to get his firm off the ground, through clients who questioned his expertise despite his impressive portfolio. The community center would be a tribute to his grandfather's memory, a way of giving back to the neighborhood that had shaped them both. Another half-hour passed. The lobby had grown busier with people coming and going. Anthony observed a pattern. White clients seemed to flow through efficiently, while the few people of color who entered waited longer or were directed to other bank employees, never to Mrs. Blackwell. At the 90-minute mark, Anthony approached the reception desk for a 3rd time. "I don't mean to be difficult," he began, keeping his voice low and measured, "but I've now been waiting for an hour and a half for a meeting that was confirmed yesterday. I have other appointments this afternoon that I can't miss. Is there perhaps another bank officer who could assist me today?" The receptionist looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Let me check with Mrs. Blackwell again," she said, picking up the phone. This time Anthony could hear the conversation more clearly. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds is still waiting." "Yes, I understand. I'll let him know." She hung up and offered Anthony an apologetic smile. "Mrs. Blackwell apologizes for the delay. She's finishing up some urgent paperwork but assures me she'll be with you very soon. She specifically wants to handle your application personally because of the nature of the project." Anthony nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but after nearly 2 hours of watching others come and go, it rang hollow. He returned to his seat, setting his portfolio aside. His enthusiasm for the presentation had dimmed, replaced by a weary resignation. He'd still give it his best. The community needed this center, but the experience had left a bitter taste. While scrolling through his phone to distract himself, Anthony overheard a conversation between 2 bank employees who had stopped near the water cooler, not far from his seat. "Is that the architect still waiting for Helen?" One whispered, "Yeah. Been here since 10. The other replied, "You know how she is with certain clients. Says they're not worth rushing for." "That's awful. His firm is actually pretty well known. I recognize the name." "Well, Helen has her preferences about who gets her immediate attention. Always has." They moved away, unaware that Anthony had heard every word. His suspicions confirmed, he sat perfectly still, processing the information. It wasn't just in his head. It wasn't just bad timing or bad luck. It was deliberate. For a moment he considered leaving, walking out and taking his business elsewhere. But the community center project couldn't afford delays. The grant funding had time limitations, and the neighborhood had already waited too long for resources they desperately needed. Anthony thought of the children who would use the center's library, the elderly residents who would have a place to gather, the families who would benefit from the health services. He would wait. Not because Mrs. Blackwell deserved his patience, but because the project deserved his persistence. As the 2-hour mark approached, Anthony heard the bank's front doors swing open. He didn't look up immediately, focused on controlling his frustration and preparing, mentally, for the meeting that might finally happen. Little did he know that the three people who had just entered the bank would completely change the course of the day and ultimately the future of his project. Anthony glanced up from his phone to see three people in crisp business attire walking through the bank's entrance. Even from a distance, they carried an unmistakable air of authority. The woman leading the group wore a tailored charcoal suit with a vibrant blue scarf that stood out against the bank's muted color scheme. She moved with purpose, her silver-streaked hair framing a face that looked both kind and formidable. The two men flanking her, one older with salt and pepper hair, the other younger with wire-rimmed glasses, listened intently as she spoke. The bank's atmosphere shifted immediately. Staff members straightened their postures, adjusted their ties, and plastered on their brightest smiles. The receptionist, who had been managing Anthony's endless wait, suddenly stood up straighter, her eyes widening slightly. Anthony returned his attention to his phone, not wanting to stare, though he couldn't help but wonder who these people were to command such an instant reaction. He'd been in the business world long enough to recognize power when he saw it. These weren't ordinary clients. His curiosity was answered moments later when the receptionist's voice rang out with unmistakable nervousness. "Dr. Patricia Wilson, what a pleasure to see you today. We weren't expecting the board members until next week's quarterly review." Board members. Anthony's ears perked up at those words. He watched discreetly as the woman, Dr. Wilson, apparently, smiled warmly at the receptionist. "We decided to conduct a few surprise visits to our branches this quarter," she explained, her voice carrying across the lobby. "Sometimes the most authentic insights come from unscheduled observations." The younger man beside her nodded, adding, "We're particularly interested in customer experience today. How clients are being served, wait times, that sort of thing." Anthony almost laughed at the irony. If they wanted to know about wait times, he had quite the story to tell. As if summoned by magic, a door down the hallway burst open, and Mrs. Blackwell emerged, walking briskly toward the entrance. The bank manager, who had kept Anthony waiting for nearly 2 hours now, moved with surprising speed, her cream-colored suit jacket fluttering slightly as she approached the board members. "Dr. Wilson." "Mr. Chen, Mr. Hartman, what a wonderful surprise," Mrs. Blackwell called out, her voice pitched higher than when Anthony had glimpsed her earlier. "Had I known you were coming, I would have prepared a proper welcome." Dr. Wilson shook her hand firmly. "That's precisely why we didn't announce our visit, Helen. We wanted to see regular operations, not a special performance." Mrs. Blackwell laughed nervously. Of course. Well, you've caught us on a particularly busy day. Would you like to start with a tour of our new digital banking kiosks? We've just implemented them last month, and the customer feedback has been tremendous." "Actually," said the older man, either Mr. Chen or Mr. Hartman, Anthony couldn't be sure, "we'd like to begin by observing your client interactions. Perhaps you could introduce us to whoever you're currently meeting with." Mrs. Blackwell's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "I was just between appointments, actually. My 10 o'clock ran long and my 11:30 is due any minute." Anthony checked his watch again. It was now approaching noon. He had been waiting since 10 for an appointment that apparently never existed in Mrs. Blackwell's mind. The revelation shouldn't have surprised him, yet it still stung. Making a split-second decision, Anthony gathered his portfolio and stood up. He had waited long enough. He would either have his meeting now or take his business elsewhere. Community center, timeline be damned. Sometimes principles mattered more than practicality. As he rose from his seat, his movement caught Dr. Wilson's eye. She glanced over, and for a brief moment their gazes met. Anthony saw something flash across her face. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. He couldn't quite place it. "Excuse me," Dr. Wilson said, interrupting Mrs. Blackwell mid-sentence. "That gentleman over there, how long has he been waiting?" Mrs. Blackwell turned, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Anthony standing with his portfolio. The color drained from her face so quickly that Anthony almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice strained. "I do apologize for the wait. We've had an unusually busy morning." Before Anthony could respond, Dr. Wilson was already walking toward him, extending her hand. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Patricia Wilson, chairwoman of the board for Westview National Bank." Anthony shook her hand firmly. "Anthony Reynolds of Reynolds and Associates Architecture." Recognition dawned on Dr. Wilson's face. "Reynolds and Associates? The firm that designed the new Westview Community College campus?" "Yes, that's us." Anthony replied, surprised that she knew his work. That building is remarkable, she said with genuine enthusiasm. I serve on the college's board as well, and the feedback from students and faculty has been overwhelmingly positive. The way you incorporated natural light into the study spaces while maintaining energy efficiency is truly innovative. Pride momentarily overshadowed Anthony's frustration. The community college project had been one of his firm's most challenging and rewarding endeavors. Thank you. We're quite proud of that design. Mrs. Blackwell had followed Dr. Wilson over, hovering awkwardly at the edge of their conversation. The two men joined them as well, introducing themselves as Michael Chen, Chief Financial Officer, and David Hartman, Head of Community Relations. What brings you to our bank today, Mr. Reynolds? Mr. Hartman asked. Anthony glanced at Mrs. Blackwell, whose expression had transformed into a mask of professional pleasantness that didn't quite reach her eyes. I had a 10 o'clock appointment with Mrs. Blackwell to discuss financing for a new community development project in the Oak Ridge neighborhood. 10 o'clock? Dr. Wilson checked her watch. It's nearly noon now. Yes, Anthony said simply, letting the implication hang in the air. I've been waiting quite patiently. Mrs. Blackwell jumped in quickly. There was a misunderstanding with the scheduling. I had back-to-back meetings this morning, and Mr. Reynolds' appointment must have been double-booked. I was just about to invite him into my office. Anthony kept his expression neutral, though inside he marveled at how smoothly the lie came out. He had watched at least 3 clients come and go from her office during his wait, including one who arrived well after he did. What kind of community development project? Mr. Chen asked, seemingly genuinely interested. Anthony opened his portfolio and pulled out a single rendering, his favorite view of the proposed community center. We're converting an abandoned department store in Oak Ridge into a multi-purpose community center. It will house educational facilities, a health clinic, recreation spaces, and a business incubator for local entrepreneurs. Mr. Hartman leaned in to look at the rendering. Oak Ridge. That's one of our target neighborhoods for community reinvestment, isn't it, Patricia? Dr. Wilson nodded. Absolutely. Part of our 5-year plan to support underserved communities. Mrs. Blackwell's smile grew increasingly strained, which is precisely why I wanted to handle Mr. Reynolds' application personally. Such an important project deserves special attention. The irony of her statement after making him wait for 2 hours wasn't lost on anyone. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Dr. Wilson broke it by turning to Mrs. Blackwell. Helen, why don't you take Mr. Reynolds to your office immediately to discuss his project? Michael, David, and I can begin our tour with Lisa at the loan department and circle back to you afterward. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a directive. Of course, Mrs. Blackwell said, her voice tight. Mr. Reynolds, shall we? As Anthony followed Mrs. Blackwell toward her office, he could feel the board members watching them go. The dynamic had shifted so dramatically in just a few minutes that it almost gave him whiplash. The bank manager, who couldn't find time for him all morning, now walked ahead with rushed steps, as if every second of his wait had suddenly become an indictment of her professionalism. Mrs. Blackwell's office was spacious and meticulously organized, with framed certificates covering one wall and a large window overlooking the street on another. She gestured for Anthony to take a seat across from her desk. I sincerely apologize for the wait, Mr. Reynolds, she said as she settled into her chair. It's been an unusually hectic morning. Anthony placed his portfolio on her desk and looked her directly in the eyes. I understand busy schedules, Mrs. Blackwell. I run a firm with 15 employees and multiple ongoing projects. But I also understand the importance of respecting other people's time. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. Yes, well, these things happen in banking. Now tell me about your project and how Westview National can help. For the next 20 minutes, Anthony presented his community center plans, explaining the financial structure, the grant funding already secured, and the loan amount needed to complete the project. He spoke with the passion and expertise that had built his reputation in the architecture world. Despite Mrs. Blackwell's periodic glances at her office door, clearly anxious about the board members' eventual return, as Anthony concluded his presentation, a knock came at the door. Dr. Wilson poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but may I join you? Community development is a particular interest of mine. Mrs. Blackwell's smile was immediate but strained. Of course, Patricia. Mr. Reynolds was just explaining his financing needs. Dr. Wilson took a seat beside Anthony, her interest in the project seemingly genuine. I'd love to hear more about the community impact aspects of this center. As Anthony began explaining the neighborhood's needs and how the center would address them, he noticed Mrs. Blackwell's expression changing. The dismissive bank manager who had kept him waiting for 2 hours was now watching him with something like respect, or perhaps it was simply fear of what Dr. Wilson might think of her earlier behavior. Either way, Anthony realized that the next phase of this meeting would be very different from what Mrs. Blackwell had originally intended. The board members' unexpected arrival had changed everything, and Anthony couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a bit of justice in the timing after all. The meeting continued with a completely different energy than Anthony had anticipated during his long wait. Dr. Wilson leaned forward in her chair, genuinely engaged as Anthony explained how the community center would transform the old department store building into a hub of activity and resources. The health clinic alone will serve approximately 500 families who currently have to travel over 3 miles to the nearest medical facility, Anthony explained, pointing to that section of the blueprint. We've partnered with County Health Services, who've committed to staffing it 3 days a week. That's exactly the kind of community impact we should be supporting, Dr. Wilson said, turning to Mrs. Blackwell. Helen, what's the status of Mr. Reynolds' loan application? Mrs. Blackwell shifted in her seat, her fingers nervously adjusting papers on her desk. Well, we haven't officially begun processing it yet. Today's meeting was meant to be preliminary. Dr. Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. I see, and what would be the next steps from here? Before Mrs. Blackwell could answer, Mr. Chen and Mr. Hartman appeared at the office door, which had been left ajar. They entered after a quick knock, making the spacious office feel suddenly crowded. How's the meeting going? Mr. Chen asked, his eyes moving between Anthony and Mrs. Blackwell. Quite informative, Dr. Wilson replied. Mr. Reynolds has an impressive project that aligns perfectly with our community reinvestment goals. She turned back to Anthony. Would you mind showing Michael and David that rendering of the community space? Anthony pulled out additional drawings from his portfolio, spreading them across Mrs. Blackwell's desk. The 3 board members gathered around, examining the designs with genuine interest while Mrs. Blackwell watched from her chair, her usual authority in this office now diminished by their presence. The architecture incorporates elements from the neighborhood's history, Anthony explained, pointing to specific features. These arches echo the design of the original town hall that was demolished in the 1970s, and we've repurposed some of the department store's display windows as skylights to reduce energy costs. Brilliant, Mr. Hartman said. And you mentioned earlier there's already partial grant funding? Anthony nodded. Yes, we've secured grants covering about 40% of the total cost. The Oak Ridge Neighborhood Association has also raised funds for the playground equipment. We're seeking a loan for the remaining construction costs. Mr. Chen looked at Mrs. Blackwell. What loan terms were you considering for this project, Helen? Mrs. Blackwell cleared her throat. We haven't discussed specific terms yet, but for community development projects, we typically offer our standard commercial real estate package. She quoted an interest rate that made Anthony wince internally. Dr. Wilson frowned slightly. That doesn't sound right. Wouldn't this qualify for our community impact program? The rates are considerably more favorable. Well, Mrs. Blackwell hesitated. The community impact program has very specific requirements. I wasn't sure if this project would qualify. Mr. Hartman was already shaking his head. This is exactly the type of project we created that program for. Established community partners, addressing multiple neighborhood needs, strong local support. He turned to Anthony. How long have you banked with Westview National, Mr. Reynolds? Personally or professionally? Anthony asked. Both. I've had personal accounts here for 15 years. My firm has been banking with Westview since we founded it 8 years ago. The 3 board members exchanged glances. Helen, Dr. Wilson said, her voice taking on a more formal tone. I think we should process Mr. Reynolds' application under the Community Impact Program immediately. Today, if possible. Mrs. Blackwell's smile was tight. Of course. I'll need to gather some additional documentation and... I have everything with me, Anthony interrupted smoothly, pulling a folder from his portfolio. Financial statements for the firm, Proof of the secured grant funding, construction timeline, contractor bids, and the property assessment. Mrs. Blackwell looked taken aback. You came very prepared. I've been working on this project for over a year, Anthony replied simply. It's important to me and to the community. There was a moment of silence as Mrs. Blackwell took the folder, her earlier dismissiveness now replaced with a stiff professionalism. The board members remained standing around her desk, clearly not intending to leave. Helen, Dr. Wilson said, why don't you begin processing Mr. Reynolds' application while we continue our discussion? I'd like to hear more about his firm's approach to sustainable community design. It was a polite but firm dismissal. Mrs. Blackwell stood, clutching Anthony's folder. Of course. I'll start on this right away and return shortly. As she left her own office, Anthony couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge or seeing someone else uncomfortable. It was about being treated with the respect he'd deserved from the beginning. Once Mrs. Blackwell was gone, Dr. Wilson took her seat behind the desk and leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize for your experience today. That's not how we expect our branch managers to treat any client, especially not a long-term customer with such an important community project. Anthony appreciated her directness. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. How long were you actually waiting before we arrived? Mr. Chen asked. I had a 10 o'clock appointment that was confirmed yesterday, Anthony replied. It was almost noon when you walked in. Mr. Hartman shook his head in disbelief. 2 hours. That's completely unacceptable. During those 2 hours, Anthony added carefully, I observed several other clients arrive after me and be seen immediately. He didn't need to spell out the pattern he'd noticed. The understanding was clear in their eyes. Dr. Wilson sighed. Unfortunately, what you experienced isn't an isolated incident. We've received similar reports about this branch, which is partly why we decided to conduct these surprise visits. Your arrival was well-timed, Anthony said with a small smile. For us as well, Dr. Wilson replied. Your community center is exactly the kind of project our bank should be championing, not putting obstacles in front of. The conversation shifted to Anthony's previous work, his vision for the community center, and the impact it would have on Oak Ridge. For the first time since arriving at the bank that morning, Anthony felt heard and valued. The 3 board members asked insightful questions and offered suggestions for additional resources that might benefit the project. About 20 minutes later, Mrs. Blackwell returned with another folder and a visibly different demeanor. She handed the folder to Dr. Wilson rather than to Anthony. I've started processing the application under the Community Impact Program, she said. Based on the preliminary review, Mr. Reynolds' project more than qualifies. The interest rate would be 3 percentage points lower than our standard commercial package, with flexible payment terms over 15 years. Dr. Wilson reviewed the documents, nodding approvingly before passing them to Anthony. This looks much more appropriate. What's your timeline for approval? Mrs. Blackwell straightened her shoulders. Typically, it takes 5 to 7 business days, but given the circumstances, I can expedite it for approval by tomorrow afternoon. That would be appreciated, Dr. Wilson said, her tone making it clear this wasn't optional. Anthony reviewed the terms outlined in the preliminary approval. They were far better than he had hoped for, even before today's unexpected turn of events. The lower interest rate would save the project hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of the loan, money that could be redirected to additional programs and services for the community. These terms are excellent, he said, looking up from the paperwork. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell nodded stiffly. I'll just need your signature on the preliminary application, and we can proceed. Anthony signed the documents, feeling a mixture of emotions, relief that the project was moving forward, satisfaction at the favorable terms, but also a lingering frustration at the obstacles he'd initially faced. If the board members hadn't walked in when they did, how differently might this day have ended? As he gathered his materials, Mr. Hartman handed him a business card. Please contact me directly if you encounter any further issues with your application. And I'd love to see the community center when construction begins. I'll definitely keep you updated, Anthony promised, appreciating the gesture. He turned to Dr. Wilson and Mr. Chen. Thank you all for your support. No, thank you for your patience today, Dr. Wilson replied, and for creating something so valuable for Oak Ridge. Our bank was founded on the principle of community investment, though sometimes we need reminders of that mission. The pointed comment wasn't lost on Mrs. Blackwell, who stood slightly apart from the group, her expression unreadable. As Anthony prepared to leave, Dr. Wilson walked with him toward the door. "One more thing, Mr. Reynolds. Our bank hosts a quarterly business leaders forum. We'd be honored if you'd consider speaking at our next event about the intersection of architecture and community development." The invitation surprised and pleased him. "I'd be happy to." "Excellent. My assistant will contact you with the details." Anthony shook hands with each of the board members and then, last of all, with Mrs. Blackwell. Her handshake was proper but cool, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'll call you tomorrow with the final approval," she said. "I look forward to it," Anthony replied professionally. As he walked through the bank lobby toward the exit, Anthony felt dozens of eyes following him. The same employees who had watched him wait for 2 hours now witnessed him leaving with the board's clear endorsement. The receptionist gave him a sheepish smile as he passed. Outside, the afternoon sun felt warm on his face. Anthony paused on the bank steps, taking a deep breath of fresh air. He pulled out his phone and dialed his wife's number. "How did it go?" Olivia asked when she answered. Anthony smiled. "It's quite a story. The short version is that we got the loan, with better terms than we expected." "That's wonderful. What's the long version?" "I'll tell you over dinner," he said, walking toward his car. "But let's just say sometimes justice arrives right when you need it most." Anthony pulled into the driveway of his home that evening with a sense of accomplishment that had been hard-won. The 2-story brick house with navy blue shutters had been their first major purchase together, and he and Olivia had spent countless weekends painting, renovating, and turning it into a home that reflected their personalities and values. As he walked through the front door, the smell of garlic and roasting chicken filled the air. Olivia appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up when she saw him. "There he is, the man of the hour," she said, giving him a quick kiss. "Dinner's almost ready. Grace is finishing her homework, and I want to hear everything about your day." Anthony loosened his tie and hung up his suit jacket. "Let me just change quickly. Is there time for me to say hi to Grace first?" "Of course. She's been asking when you'd be home." Anthony climbed the stairs and knocked gently on his daughter's bedroom door, which was decorated with colorful paintings and a sign that read, "Future Architect at Work." "Come in," called a young voice. Grace was sitting cross-legged on her bed, textbooks and notebooks spread around her. At 12 years old, she had her mother's warm brown eyes and her father's determined chin. She looked up and broke into a wide smile. "Dad, did you get the money for the community center?" Anthony sat on the edge of her bed. "How did my middle schooler get so business-savvy?" Grace rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Mom told me that's what your big meeting was about today." "So did you?" "Yes, we did. The loan was approved with even better terms than we hoped for." "Yes." Grace pumped her fist in the air. "That means the teen space will happen too, right?" Anthony nodded. The teen space had been Grace's suggestion, a section of the community center specifically designed for middle and high school students to study, socialize, and develop projects together. "Absolutely. Your design input was too good to pass up." Grace beamed with pride. "When can we visit the site again?" "This weekend if you want. The initial demolition work inside the old building starts Monday." "I'll be ready with my hard hat," she said, referring to the child-sized yellow construction hat he had bought her when she first showed interest in his work. Anthony smiled, once again struck by how his daughter's passion for architecture mirrored his own at her age. "Finish your homework and I'll see you downstairs for dinner in 15 minutes. After changing into jeans and a comfortable shirt, Anthony joined Olivia in the kitchen where she was placing a perfectly roasted chicken on a serving platter. "Want to open a bottle of wine?" she suggested. "Sounds like we have something to celebrate." "Definitely," Anthony agreed, selecting a bottle of their favorite red from the small wine rack. As he poured 2 glasses, Olivia studied his face. "So you got the loan, but something else happened." "I can tell by your voice." Anthony shook his head with a smile. 13 years of marriage and I still can't hide anything from you." "Not a chance," she replied. "So what happened?" "Let's wait for Grace and I'll tell you both the whole story." Once they were seated around the dining table, plates filled with roast chicken, roasted potatoes, and green beans, Anthony recounted his experience at the bank, the long wait, the overheard conversation between employees, and the dramatic entrance of the board members. 2 hours? Olivia exclaimed, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. That's outrageous. That's discrimination, Grace said matter-of-factly, surprising both her parents. We learned about it in social studies. When people treat you differently because of how you look. Anthony and Olivia exchanged glances. They had always tried to be honest with their daughter about the realities of the world while preserving her sense of optimism. You're right, sweetheart, Anthony said carefully, and unfortunately it happens more often than it should. But you didn't give up, Grace pointed out. And then those board people came in and changed everything. Sometimes timing works in your favor, Anthony agreed. But the important thing is that the community center is moving forward. That's the real win here. Later that night, after Grace had gone to bed, Anthony and Olivia sat on their back porch, enjoying the mild evening air and the remainder of the wine. Are you going to file a complaint about that bank manager? Olivia asked. Anthony took a sip of his wine, considering the question. I'm not sure. Dr. Wilson, the board chairwoman, seemed well aware of the problem. I think they were already monitoring the situation. Still, your experience could help build their case, Olivia said. She worked as a high school guidance counselor and had dealt with her share of institutional barriers. Sometimes these things need to be documented formally. You're right, Anthony admitted. I'll send Dr. Wilson an email tomorrow putting my experience in writing. Good, Olivia said, reaching over to take his hand. I'm proud of you, not just for handling today with such dignity, but for this whole community center project. It's going to change so many lives. Anthony squeezed her hand gratefully. I couldn't do any of it without your support. The next morning, Anthony arrived at his architecture firm's office earlier than usual. The modern space occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the open workspace with natural light. His team of 15 architects, designers, and support staff would be arriving soon, and he wanted to update them on the loan approval before their weekly meeting. As he settled at his desk, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Westview National Bank. Anthony Reynolds speaking, he answered professionally. Mr. Reynolds, this is Helen Blackwell. The bank manager's voice sounded different today, subdued and formal. I'm calling to inform you that your loan application has been fully approved under our Community Impact Program. The paperwork is ready for your signature whenever it's convenient for you to come in. Thank you for the quick turnaround, Mrs. Blackwell, Anthony replied, keeping his tone neutral. I appreciate it. There was a pause on the line before she continued. I also wanted to apologize for your wait time yesterday. It was unprofessional of me to keep you waiting so long. The apology sounded rehearsed and reluctant, but it was an apology nonetheless. Anthony wondered if Dr. Wilson had instructed her to make this call. Thank you for acknowledging that, he said simply. I'll stop by this afternoon to sign the paperwork. After hanging up, Anthony drafted an email to Dr. Wilson, documenting his experience at the bank in clear, factual terms. He described the length of his wait, the preferential treatment he observed other clients receiving, and the overheard conversation between bank employees. He ended the email by expressing appreciation for the board's intervention and the subsequent approval of the loan. By the time his team began arriving, Anthony had shifted his focus to the exciting work ahead. His project manager, Lisa, knocked on his office door, coffee cup in hand. I hear congratulations are in order, she said with a smile. The loan came through? It did, Anthony confirmed. We can proceed with the full scope of the project, including the teen space and the expanded health clinic. That's fantastic, Lisa exclaimed. The contractors will be thrilled. They were worried about having to scale back. No scaling back, Anthony assured her.
In fact, we might be able to include some of the sustainable features we had in the original design.
The loan terms are better than expected. Throughout the morning, Anthony led his team through the updated plans for the community center. The energy in the room was palpable as designers and architects eagerly discussed ideas that had previously been constrained by budget concerns. At lunchtime, Anthony received another unexpected call, this time from David Hartman, the bank's head of community relations. Mr. Reynolds, I hope I'm not interrupting your day, Hartman began. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. After you left, the board had a lengthy discussion about your community center project. We're very impressed with your vision, and we'd like to explore ways the bank could support it beyond just the construction loan. Anthony sat up straighter in his chair. I'm listening. We have a foundation that provides grants for educational programs. Your planned computer lab and literacy center would qualify. It wouldn't be a huge amount, perhaps $50,000, but it could cover equipment costs and some initial programming. That would be incredible, Anthony said, genuinely surprised by this turn of events. We've been seeking additional funding for exactly those components. Excellent. I'll have the foundation director contact you with the application details, but consider it pre-approved. We're also interested in having some of our employees volunteer for the business mentorship program you mentioned. The conversation continued, with Hartman expressing genuine enthusiasm for various aspects of the community center. By the time they hung up, Anthony had secured not only additional funding but also a valuable partnership with the bank's foundation. As he sat at his desk, processing this unexpected development, Anthony couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between yesterday morning's experience and today's outcome. What had begun as an exercise in frustration and discrimination had transformed into an opportunity that would benefit the entire Oak Ridge community. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Any news from the bank? Anthony smiled as he typed his reply. More than you can imagine. Can't wait to tell you tonight. He set down his phone and turned to his computer, opening the community center plans that had been his passion project for over a year. There was still much work to be done, permits to secure, contractors to coordinate, and countless details to finalize. But today, the path forward seemed clearer than ever. What Mrs. Blackwell had intended as an obstacle had become a gateway to even greater possibilities. Sometimes, Anthony thought, justice worked in unexpected ways. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The old department store in Oak Ridge had transformed dramatically, its faded exterior now replaced with a modern facade featuring large windows and a welcoming entrance plaza. Inside, what had once been a cavernous retail space was taking shape as distinct areas for education, healthcare, recreation, and community gathering. Anthony stood in the center of the main hall, hard hat on, surveying the progress around him. Construction workers moved purposefully through the space, hanging drywall, installing lighting, and laying flooring. The project was on schedule and, thanks to the favorable loan terms from Westview National Bank, running comfortably within budget. Looking good, isn't it? Said Robert, the site foreman, approaching with a clipboard in hand. Better than I imagined, Anthony admitted, gazing up at the skylight that had once been a department store atrium. The natural light poured down, illuminating the space in a way that felt almost symbolic of the new beginning this building represented. The health clinic area is ready for equipment installation next week, Robert reported, and the teen center's special acoustics are working perfectly like we tested them yesterday. Anthony nodded appreciatively. The teen center had become one of his favorite parts of the project, partly because of his daughter's enthusiasm for it, but also because of the specialized design elements they'd incorporated to make it both functional and appealing to young people. Any word on when that bank foundation is sending over the computer equipment? Robert asked. Next Tuesday, Anthony replied. Mr. Hartman confirmed it yesterday. The partnership with Westview National Bank's foundation had expanded beyond the initial grant. The bank had committed to providing all the computers for the center's digital learning lab, as well as funding for instructors to teach coding classes 3 evenings a week. Anthony's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Wilson, running a few minutes late. Be there by 10:15. Today marked an important milestone, the first official tour of the construction site for key stakeholders, including representatives from the bank, the neighborhood association, and local government officials. Anthony had been preparing for this day, eager to show how their collective investment was taking physical shape. I need to head to the entrance, he told Robert. Our guests will be arriving soon. I'll make sure the walkways are clear, Robert assured him. As Anthony made his way toward the front of the building, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had led to this moment. What had begun as a frustrating experience of discrimination had somehow catalyzed a deeper engagement from the bank and other community partners. The publicity surrounding the project had grown, attracting additional donors and volunteers. He reached the temporary entrance just as the first cars pulled into the parking lot. Olivia was among the earliest arrivals, having taken a half-day from her counseling job at the high school to attend the tour. "This is so exciting," she said, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. "The outside looks amazing already." "Wait until you see inside," Anthony replied with a smile. The colors in the children's library turned out exactly as we hoped. They were joined by members of the Oak Ridge Neighborhood Association, longtime residents who had advocated for years to bring resources to their community. Anthony greeted each one by name, having worked closely with them throughout the planning process. "Is that the famous teen center my granddaughter keeps talking about?" asked Mrs. Thompson, the association's 72-year-old president, pointing to a section of the building. "It is," Anthony confirmed. "And we incorporated those murals she and the other students designed. They're being painted next week." Mrs. Thompson beamed with pride. The teen center had become a true community effort, with local students contributing ideas for everything from the furniture arrangement to the wall colors. More cars arrived, bringing city council members, representatives from the health services department, and finally a sleek black SUV carrying Dr. Wilson. Mr. Hartman and another bank executive Anthony hadn't met before. Noticeably absent was Mrs. Blackwell. Anthony had heard through the grapevine that she'd been transferred to a smaller branch in another city shortly after his loan approval. The official explanation was reorganization, but few believed that was the whole story. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Wilson called out warmly, extending her hand. "I've been looking forward to seeing your progress." "We're delighted to have you here," Anthony replied, shaking her hand, and then Mr. Hartman's. "And we're grateful for the Foundation's continued support." "This is Thomas Parker," Dr. Wilson said, introducing the third bank representative. "He's our new branch manager for the Westview location." Anthony shook hands with a middle-aged man whose firm handshake and direct eye contact immediately distinguished him from his predecessor. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Reynolds," Parker said sincerely. "Your community center has become something of a legend at the bank. I'm looking forward to continuing our partnership." Once everyone had arrived, Anthony addressed the group. "Thank you all for coming today. What you're about to see is the result of true community collaboration. Every space in this building reflects input from the people who will use it. This isn't just a building project. It's about creating a foundation for opportunity in Oak Ridge." He led them through the construction site, pointing out key features and explaining how each area would function. The healthcare wing with its 5 exam rooms and consultation area. The education spaces with classrooms for adult learning and after-school programs. The business incubator where local entrepreneurs could access resources and mentorship. "And this," Anthony said with special pride as they entered a large, open space with soaring ceilings, "will be our community gathering area. It can be configured for everything from neighborhood meetings to cultural celebrations to job fairs." "It's magnificent," Dr. Wilson commented, looking up at the clever use of the former department store's architecture. "You've honored the building's history while giving it an entirely new purpose." As the tour continued, Anthony noticed Mr. Parker taking particular interest in the financial literacy classroom, where the bank had committed to offering free workshops for community members. "We could expand this program," Parker suggested. "Add sessions specifically for small business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs." "That would be wonderful," Anthony agreed. "There's significant interest in business development in this neighborhood." By the time they reached the teen center, the final stop on the tour, the group's enthusiasm was palpable. Everyone could envision the finished space and the impact it would have. "My daughter helped design some of these elements," Anthony explained, showing them the circular study pods and the performance area. "She and her friends wanted a place that felt both safe and inspiring. She has her father's eye for design," Olivia added proudly. As the tour concluded and people began to disperse into smaller conversation groups, Dr. Wilson pulled Anthony aside. "I owe you an update," she said in a lowered voice. "After your experience at our bank, we conducted a comprehensive review of all our branches. What we found was troubling, a pattern of disparate treatment that went beyond your individual case." Anthony nodded, unsurprised but appreciative of her candor. "We've implemented mandatory training for all customer-facing staff," she continued, And we've established new metrics to track wait times and approval rates across demographic groups. It's just a start, but it's a necessary one. I'm glad something positive came from that day, Anthony said, though I admit at the time all I felt was frustration. Understandably so, Dr. Wilson acknowledged. But your dignity in handling it, and your willingness to document your experience afterward, helped us address a systemic issue. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a school bus in the parking lot. Anthony checked his watch and smiled. Right on time, he said. I hope you don't mind, but I arranged a special addition to our tour today. The bus doors opened and 30 middle school students spilled out, their excited voices carrying across the construction site. Among them was Grace, who waved enthusiastically when she spotted her parents. These are students from Oak Ridge Middle School, Anthony explained to the group. Many of them have been contributing ideas to the project from the beginning. I thought they deserved to see their input taking shape. The students were given their own brief tour, guided by both Anthony and Robert, who patiently answered their many questions. The adults watched with smiles as the children's enthusiasm echoed through the unfinished spaces, bringing a preview of the life and energy that would soon fill the building permanently. As the afternoon wound down, Anthony found himself standing once again in the central hall with Olivia and Grace beside him. It's really happening. Dad? Grace said, looking around with wonder. It's even better than the drawings. That's because drawings can't capture how a place feels, Anthony explained. Buildings have a spirit that comes alive when people start to inhabit them. Olivia squeezed his hand. And this one has a pretty special spirit already. Over the next 3 months, the community center moved steadily toward completion. The computers arrived for the digital lab. The health clinic equipment was installed. The teen center furniture was assembled by a team of volunteer parents and students. On opening day, 6 months after that fateful meeting at Westview National Bank, Anthony stood at the podium before a crowd of over 300 community members. The ribbon-cutting ceremony had drawn people from across the city, including every bank representative who had been involved with the project. This center began as a dream, Anthony told the audience, a dream that many people in this community have held for years. It faced obstacles, as all worthwhile dreams do, but it also found champions in our neighborhood association, in our local government, and yes, in our financial institutions. He made brief eye contact with Dr. Wilson and Mr. Parker in the front row. What stands behind me today is more than a building. It's a statement about what we value as a community. It says that we believe in creating spaces where people can learn, heal, connect, and grow. It says that we're willing to invest in each other's potential. As Anthony cut the ribbon and the doors officially opened, he felt a profound sense of completion. The long wait he had endured that day at the bank, a wait designed to diminish him, had instead become the first step in a journey that had elevated an entire community. Sometimes, he reflected as he watched people stream into the new building, justice worked in unexpected ways, and sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination wasn't just to overcome it, but to transform it into something that lifted everyone higher.